So yes, again, thank you very much for coming. I'm Helen Wilson, so I'm one of the committee of the Sustainability Network, and we're joined today by Holly Coyle. Thank you so much, Holly, who's going to talk about green finance. And Holly has been with Climate Action Lewisham for some time and presented about this there. And it was through attending this presentation that one of our network members was so enthralled and enthused, suggested that we invite Holly to come along to talk about this matter, which I know a lot of us are concerned about. So yeah, Holly will share the slides afterwards and has very kindly agreed to let the recording go up online, which is wonderful. So hopefully we can reach more of you as well at a later point. Holly, take it away.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Helen. And thank you all who are attending today. Yes, so I am part of Climate Action Lewisham. So all the slides do say Climate Action Lewisham at the bottom. Somehow I have managed to get away through the last few years without ever having to do any screen sharing. So this is my first attempt at this today, and hopefully all goes well and to plan. It did just in the test run a moment ago. I would just like to note that I am not a financial advisor, and I'm not a specialist or expert in this field by any means. But what I am is someone who is really interested and fortunately has the skills to be able to research, I think, quite thoroughly. And so I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I've researched with you today. It is quite a statistically intense talk at some points, but yeah, you will have everything sent over to you with references. But hopefully it's still enthralling and engaging for you. So yeah, so how clean is your money? This is about banking, pensions and the climate crisis. And presumably you're all here because you care about the climate emergency and you're interested to know how clean your money is. So most of us will be financing the climate emergency in ways that we might not even realise. So the problem is that since the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding treaty on climate change, UK banks have invested over £3.8 trillion into the fossil fuel industry. And these investments are how banks continue to make a profit. So despite the fact that fossil fuels are the leading cause of climate breakdown, these investments are a choice that they are continuing to make because they've got enough custom to get away with it. So let's begin with how much these industries are worth. So if we look at the pension part in terms of the annual premium equivalent, which in its crudest form, what this means is similar how we look at the idea of new business or new revenue, then the annual pension market in the UK is worth £13.9 billion. And if we look at data from 2021, we can see that the financial industries comprised 8.3% of the UK's economic output, which is a big part of how we measure GDP. So in monetary terms, that 8.3% equates to £173.6 billion. And then in 2022, government reporting indicates that the financial industries also have about £1.6 trillion worth of domestic assets. Look, I have to be very careful how I click through these. So, of the UK's FTSE 5, that's Lloyds, Barclays, HSBC, NatWest and Standard Chartered, they have a post-cumulative pre-tax profit of £37.4 billion, and yet the Office of Budget Responsibility, they suggest that over the next 6 years, these FTSE 5 are still going to receive £150 billion of interest paid from the Bank of England. So this is just to highlight that the financial industries, they are massive and they have an extraordinary amount of investment power, privilege and impunity. So we need to be really purposeful about what we invest in. So now we've got some big facts under our belt. I'm just going to do a bit of scene setting. So there's lots of like sayings and adages around money and finance, and many of us are familiar with the idea that money makes the world go round, and it's also the root of all evil. And we do indeed live in a culture that is dominated by economic growth and consumerism. And along with finance, these things, they all overlap and they feed off of one another. And so it's come to be that many of the ways that humans judge and measure one another, they centre around things like financial stability, asset-based wealth, and ultimately social class. So we know that financial security is essential for people's mental and physical health, but only to a point, after which there's quite a lot of evidence that indicates that more money does not equate to a better life. So the enormous profits that banks are generating from fossil fuel and high carbon industries, these are at grotesque odds with the average person's income. And sorry, I've got a couple of mice on the go here. So yeah, these enormous profits, they're at grotesque odds to the average person's income. So this all starts to paint a pretty nefarious picture, especially when it's the globally average person whose lives and lands are being exploited. It's obviously in addition to the very real threat to all life on this delicately balanced planet. So a couple of years ago, according to the World Bank, 45 out of 121 countries who had available data. Of those 45 countries, less than half of the people in those 45 countries had access to a bank account. And so here in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority estimates that 1.3 million adults are what they call unbanked. So having access to a bank account, it isn't 100% necessary, even for people living in England, but it is obviously highly advantageous. So it's advantageous in the way that it helps with things like proof of personhood and wage payments and benefit credits, but it's also advantageous because it actually makes life cheaper. If you are an unbanked individual, research from 2019 indicates that you will pay an extra £485 a year on average, and that's for things like premiums for utility bills, mobile phone contracts, personal loans, and things like that. So I say this to demonstrate the fact that cash is no longer king in this country, but once upon a time it was. And in many places it still is. And although banking facilities do have lots of benefits, I think it's really important that we remember that this is a direction we have been collectively ushered in. It's not an inherent property of human existence. Banking as a system has been quite specifically designed. Okay, so now that we've been introduced to this slightly insidious reality of the orchestration of finances, let's consider how we start to bring new members on board, often at quite an unnecessarily young age. So perhaps some of us remember the NatWest family of piggy banks. They started with Woody, who sat in their nappy, and then as you saved money, you worked through the entire family, ending up with Sir Nathaniel in their very sharp business suit. And this was just one of the many marketing ploys that have been wielded at children to get them on board and ready to settle into what is hopefully a lifetime of banking loyalty. And this isn't to suggest that learning financial literacy isn't important. It really is important, but it's also important to recognise that historically, once we're on board with a particular bank, we tend to stick with them for decades or often a lifetime. So if you're an average undergrad at university, your affiliation or subscription to a bank, regardless of how much money you do or don't have, just your affiliation with them alone is worth £1.51 million over the course of a lifetime. So our custom to a bank for a lot of us is actually worth more money than we might be likely to earn. So snaring customers from a really young age, this has been really big business. And this trend is starting to change. So if we were to look at data from 2001, we can see that within 2 years of turning 18, only 16% of baby boomers had switched from their original bank to an alternative. As we move towards Gen Z, this has increased slightly. 19% of people have made the switch. Millennials, a little bit better. 26% of millennials have made a change in their banking patterns after turning 18. But Gen Z, they're the ones that are most likely to take action, with 57% of Gen Z choosing to switch accounts within 2 years of turning 18. So, in general, how long do people have the same bank accounts and why do they choose to switch? So, if we look at data from YouGov in 2020, we can see that 35% of people have had the same current account provider for 2 decades. Just under another quarter have spent over 1 decade with the same provider, and about another quarter spent between 4 and 10 years. So, sort of unlike motor insurance or even relationships for a lot of people, the majority of people actually lock into one bank in particular and then they just become pretty inert. But if people do switch, what are the things that encourage that change? Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, getting people to switch banks is pretty big business. So there's lots of research that goes into this topic, and it makes it quite challenging to find the accuracy in it all. But the general themes that seem to come up centre around things like a cash incentive for the initial switch, the rewards and benefits that come with certain accounts, better interest rates, overdraft facilities, and also customer service. And these things are all really understandable, especially in a cost of living crisis. You know, we want to save money and we want to be treated courteously and effectively while we do. I think something that really stands out here is, despite the fact that 59% of Gen Z report being extremely worried about the changing climate, most research indicates their primary motive for switching banks is to access better digital services and personalisation. So this brings home the importance of why we need to better understand this system and why we need to actively talk about it, because as Gen Z are entering the workplace, they are going to become the next big economic force that feeds these financial industries. And we know that they care. So we really need to make sure that they also know the weight of what it is that they're doing so that they can make better and more informed decisions.
Holly, could I just come in a moment? Thank you so much. This is really fascinating. We just wanted to check we're seeing all the slides right. So we've just been seeing slides. Is that okay? I know you had some other web pages. It wasn't meant to flick in between the web pages, was it? Because I admit we haven't been seeing web pages, just the slides.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. No, it had also been crossing my mind. I was trying to remember what was on the next slide, and yeah, there's a lot more interaction that comes sort of a little bit later on where we
That's
talk
fine. We
about
just wanted to be sure we'd got
yeah.
the right things. People were seeing the slides. All right. Thank you. No, it's
No,
absolutely
thank you for
fascinating and a really
checking.
great point. And it's just so funny what we were saying before. Before I let everybody in was about how I haven't changed bank account. Like, and that's the loyalty bit coming all the way through, and you just get stuck. So it's quite funny hearing you say that now, and I'm very open to hearing what you say going forward. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for checking as well, because as I said, I have not done much of this slide sharing, well, any sort of slide sharing business before. So it's a whole process for me to be keeping up with what things look like and what I'm talking about. So I appreciate you checking in.
That's
Thank
fine.
you.
It's looking great. At the minute, we can see all your slides down the side now and your main slide. And before, we could see just the main slide. So that was fine. We just didn't know whether it was meant to have switched in between.
Thank you
Perfect.
so
That's
much.
all right. Thank you.
I'll go back to present. So yeah, I mean, actually, I feel like of the slides that I've got here, I feel like everything that we've looked at so far has been covered. Um, so yeah, if we were to look at a little bit more about what impact our money does have. So once we begin to pick apart the ethics of like pretty much anything that humans are involved with, we begin to see the impact of those things in terms of their production and their existence. And as most things in this world now cost money, the money itself becomes another part of that puzzle that needs to be considered. So when we begin to look at how mainstream banks invest their money, or really we should say our money that we give to them, we can see that some of what they invest in is directly implicated in the climate crisis, and many more things are indirectly implicated. So the things that are directly implicated are things like new gas and oil pipelines, offshore drilling, investments in fracking and coal mines, and these investments, they're happening all over the world, often in countries who are most impacted or most severely impacted by the changing climate. And so, for example, this includes 15 new developments in the Philippines that are either proposed or planned or under construction. These are primarily for gas and oil extraction. So not only is this an ethical abomination with regards to the global climate crisis, but the leverage that these financially prosperous countries and corporations, the leverage that they can place on vulnerable countries such as the Philippines, it will really starts to compound the issue of climate justice with racial justice and essentially the exploitation of populations with weaker financial capacity and fewer structures of welfare. So the indirect investments of our banks and our pensions, which are easily as problematic, our pensions, these are things like investments in the arms industry, which in the UK alone, this produces 11 million tonnes of CO2e equivalent. So that's CO2 equivalent is like the idea of like greenhouse gases, rather than just looking at carbon. It could be lots of other gases that also affect the climate. But yeah, just kind of looking at the equivalent under the banner of carbon dioxide. And then there's another 2 million in arms industry, 2 million tonnes of CO2e in arms millions exports. Obviously, the arms industry is also, the destruction of many lives and habitats, both human and otherwise. Other direct investments include the tobacco industry, which is the root of the world's most littered item. It's also an industry that is very often, it acidifies the soil as a result of fertilizer use, and it causes the death of more than 8 million people around the world each year. It requires a surprising amount of deforestation, particularly in the Miombo dry desert, that's in Southeast Africa. Again, so it's another continent that is just sort of ripe for exploitation by wealthy Western nations. And then the biggest indirect carbon emitting industry, which also requires vast deforestation, is the industry of animal agriculture. And this clocks in at quite a sphincter shuddering 7.1 gigatons of CO2e per annum. And then I think it's really important when we talk about tons, like tons and gigatons of gas, and we remember that like this is tons and gigatons of gas. It's not just a ton of rocks. It's a ton of gas. Like this, gas is, we don't really even consider it to have weight. So these volumes are absolutely enormous. So when we begin to really look at how our banks and our pension providers invest our money, it is a really grim picture. And I don't think that any of us would actively be choosing to fund these sorts of deadly projects. And yet through either naivety or ignorance, or just being, having hurried, busy lifestyles that don't afford us the time to really examine these things, we are supporting these projects. Our money is directly funding the destruction of our life support system, and that is all in the name of profit for these banks. So if we were then to look at something positive for a minute, which I think you'd all probably quite like to do now, Ethical Consumer magazine, they do some really fantastic research, very thorough research into the credentials of many products and services, including banks. So recently they scrutinised 31 different banks and they used the following criteria. Firstly, they checked to see if the bank in question had a robust policy to prevent the finance of fossil fuels. That's not a policy with any of those lovely little loopholes that are left open for people to squeeze through. Secondly, they scrutinised how each bank invested in other companies and whether these other companies had their own high carbon investments, sort of like supply chain carbon or financially embodied carbon. Thirdly, they looked at each bank's efforts and policies to reduce their emissions, both their direct emissions and the emissions of their chosen investments, and whether or not this falls in line with the 1.5 degrees as laid out by the Paris Agreement. And then finally, they just simply checked the obvious. They checked to see whether that bank had been named in relation to any fossil fuel projects. So using this criteria, they found that only 2 of the 31 banks investigated achieved the ranking of best bank, and that is Triodos and Co-op/Smile, which is like the online arm of Cooperative Bank. And I've sort of switched to another slide now, even though we're not quite up to the pension section just yet, but we are approaching it. So yeah, maybe you're sitting here, maybe you're thinking, well, I've been reading about the environmentally responsible investments of my own bank, and I don't think they're that bad. And whilst it's almost certain that your bank is investing in some projects that embody the environmental progress that we desperately need, it is also certain that they have a fantastic marketing team who want you to see just that and ignore all of the dirty, polluting and exploitative investments that are the real sort of cash cows. So a good example of this is HSBC, who just in advance of COP26, they were famously banned by the Advertising Standards Authority for their misleading adverts. The adverts in question, they were focused on how the banking giant aimed to invest over £1 trillion in climate-friendly initiatives, which is an inconceivably large amount of money. But what they failed to disclose from their annual report was that their investment spends and services were directly linked to 65.3 million tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. So when these sorts of figures, when we hear these sorts of figures, we could be forgiven for wondering how much of a difference our custom or lack thereof will actually make to the climate crisis. But there is also an organisation called Make My Money Matter who conducted research which indicates that moving away from a pension provider who invests in fossil fuel and carbon intensive industries, this can help save up to 21 times as much as if we stopped flying, switched to a vegetarian diet and changed to renewable energy providers at home. 21 times as much as those 3 things combined. Okay, so making this change, this is significant. And if we think of things like diet and renewables and slow travel as being important habits to examine, and they are really important habits to examine. So if you are already doing them or if you're considering doing them, please don't stop. But our pension outsmokes these things by 21 times over. So switching pensions, switching banks, these are really impactful steps to take. And Make My Money Matter, they've also put together some really user-friendly campaigns that are just essentially just template emails for you to send to your bank and building bank and pension providers. So I'm going to go through some of those at the end when we start clicking on some links. I think there's some interesting things that we can kind of have a look at together. I wonder what my next slide says. Okay, so yeah, what else do we need to consider? We know that for every we know that there is an environmental impact for absolutely every type of financial transaction, and we know that the production of physical cash, this requires earth resources like metal and water, and the immediate resource that you might think of with things like cards is the use of plastic. And then mobile wallets or smart tech, they require some pretty devastating mining for the rare earth materials like cobalt. That's used in all sorts of digital hardware, smartphones and watches, as well as all these power-hungry digital processing that goes along with the use of smart technology. So the way that we pay for things, it has changed quite rapidly. It's changed loads. Even in my lifetime, I've seen the old clunk machines that I remember my mum paying for things at Superdrug. So yeah, we've seen this huge leaps of progress of how we physically pay for things. But when it comes to cash, quite specifically, we need to use it or we're going to lose it. And there's some definite benefits to electronic payments, but given that that is now the norm, I'm just going to outline a few of the benefits of cash payments, and they might not seem like a huge deal, but I think that they all sort of feed into this very rich tapestry of solutions that we're really looking to bring to life. So, benefits of using cash. It's more likely that we can keep money circulating in our local economies. For example, rather than buying things online, we might visit our local hardware shop, or we might feel more inclined to pop into a newsagent that has a minimum card spend, which is used to cover transaction fees, and then we might buy something from them that's just a very small amount of money. It's it's keeping money back in the pockets of our neighbours rather than CEOs and stakeholders. Having cash also encourages us to support people and charities in ways that only ever paying by card doesn't allow. It means that we can donate to charity pots, or we can buy a big issue magazine. And it just allows us to keep better on top of what it is that we're spending. So we get better at budgeting. And in this world that is built around consumerism, whether you need to budget or not, just having that awareness of what we're buying is often quite insightful. And so far, we've been focused on traditional, or what I was quite interested to learn is called fiat currency. I didn't know that that's what traditional currency is called, but over the last 15 years, we've seen various types of digital or cryptocurrency making their way onto the world stage. And these types of financial exchange have become really quite exciting for a lot of people because they are decentralized. They do not require a central bank to uphold or maintain them, which in itself it suggests subversion of the sort of current corruption that we're at the mercy of. But they do bring with them a whole new world of problems to the climate emergency. So cryptocurrencies are a big subject that they could really easily have a whole talk unto their self, unto their own. So I'm just going to cover sort of the basics of why they're of concern. So they rely on servers to keep them running, which much like Google and Meta and Netflix do. And these servers, they are incredibly power hungry. They need to be temperature controlled to function. And because of the aspect of security, particularly for anything to do with finance, the aspect of security, they rely on these highly complex series of mathematical calculations known as blockchain technology in order to keep them safe. So much like if you or I were to sit and complete equation after equation after equation, we'd use up a lot of our mental processing power. And this technology, it also uses immense amounts of power, because the world of cryptocurrency essentially has its own stock market. These transactions and calculations, they are continuous. So sort of before we even begin to consider the moral and philosophical quandaries of this new realm of economics, we can already see that there are some really serious environmental concerns about these new technologies. And as mentioned, Gen Z are the next big wave of economic investors. So as true digital natives, this could be a really notable intersection. There are people who claim this isn't all terrible and that you can get greener currencies than others. I personally can't find any reliable evidence of this. And I would suggest any research that people might want to do is always treated with a very scrupulous eye. So we all understand that savings and pensions, they are to help provide for us in emergencies and in our older years. So it's fair that we do want to get a return on our investment. What would be the point of investing in our future if we don't get any support back when we need it? But in the same vein, what is the point of investing in the future if those investments are the things that are breaking down our planet's life support system? So yeah, we have to understand that there will be people who really don't want to look at this, and they might say something like, well, if my money isn't being invested into high yield industries like gas, oil, animal agriculture, then how can I expect to have a return on my investments to support me when I need it? And I think the counter response to this would be to choose investments that provide for the collective, not just the individual. So, like all complex issues, the changes that we need to see, they're tugging at many aspects of our society, society as a whole, and our humanity as individuals. So fundamentally, if we want to animate new solutions, we need a new perspective on what's possible. So if we choose banks and pension providers who invest directly into our communities, into our hospitals, our nursing homes, our transport systems, for example, then we're providing the bulk of the tangible support that we each need, rather than just the monetary support that sort of inevitably ends up being quite unequally distributed anyway. So this is a process of redefining wealth, not classifying it as something individual that people can hoard and sort of lord over one another, but it's coming to appreciate wealth as something shared and genuinely for the common good. I'm going to have a look now at what we can do. I've got sort of another section that I was thinking about going straight into, but maybe it's quite nice to have a look at what can we do. So I've got this list of slides here. Or maybe it's helpful if I hide this little bit so you can see the very bottom bit there. So what can we do? So we can make use of the Make My Money Matter tool, which I previously mentioned. We can actively boycott banks and pension providers by switching to alternatives. This is actually really easy to do. We can talk about and share this info with our friends and colleagues and neighbours and peers, and we can follow organisations that are already supporting these changes. So I'm going to go on to some tabs here so we can just start to have a look at things. So Make My Money Matter, let's start there. So Make My Money Matter. So if we were to select pension providers, I had a little look earlier and I could see that Icon's pension provider looked to be so a group stakeholder defined contribution pension plan for staff was set up with cooperative insurance services in 2009. And I don't know if they show up under another name on your wage slip, but I couldn't seem to find them here. So here you can see a list of lots of different pension providers. And yeah, I couldn't seem to find cooperative on here. I don't know if anyone does know whether they come up under another name or not. But
I have to say I'm not aware of it, I'm afraid.
No,
But
thank you.
feel free to evidence through another route. This is fascinating. I didn't know you could look at all of these things up. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so pleased to hear you say it's fascinating, because sometimes I think, oh, it's quite a dry subject, but I have found it really fascinating to research. So
I know it's so
thank you for
important. I
those
think that's the
words.
thing. And like we said earlier, it can be so over-facing. I think certainly for me, not to speak for everyone else, but not quite knowing where to look or what you have to think about. So yeah, no, it's all been very very enlightening for me. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, if you have private pensions, or perhaps if you have a loved one or a partner or anyone else that you know has a pension that they might be interested in examining, you can go to this Make My Money Matter. There's lots of really interesting things on this website, but the pension providers here, I was really happy to see when I clicked on, I think they're pronounced Aegon, but I'm not entirely sure. So this is who my employer chooses as our pension provider, and you can see that it says, great news. We've been working closely and they've already committed to making all of their pensions net zero. Well done for having a great pension provider. And if they are not quite as good, like I'm going to imagine Barclays, yeah. So you suddenly, then what you are presented with is, dear trustee, as a member of your fund, I'm concerned that high carbon emissions in my pension are a serious long-term financial risk. You get to fill this in and you get to send this off. So it gives you a really easy template that you can just send straight away. So it's a very helpful way to make something immediate and straightforward. What else have we got on this list? So we can actively boycott banks and pension providers by switching to alternatives. And you can do this in 7 days. It's really easy. It's very straightforward. They do absolutely everything for you. I am not a financial advisor, so I cannot tell you who to switch to, but as mentioned, Triodos and Cooperative are really good banks to consider. And if they're not practical for you for whatever reason, because I know Triodos, they've only got a branch in Bristol, so if they're not practical for you, Nationwide, like not too far behind. Metro, also another high street bank that actually have pretty good credentials. So making the 7-day switch is really straightforward. We can talk about and share this information with our friends, colleagues, neighbours, peers. And there's actually, let me just check which tab it is. There's this wonderful climate outreach.org. They have created a handbook for people who want to be talking more about this. I haven't downloaded it here, but you can just see the webpage, Talking Climate Handbook, how to have climate change conversations. And this can be a really challenging thing for a lot of us to step into conversations about. So yeah, having tools that help us understand how to do that more effectively, I think is really helpful. Follow organisations like Make My Money Matter, Positive Money, Fossil Free London, the Money Rebellion, they're part of Extinction Rebellion. And if you're on social media, sharing campaigns and social media posts online, using hashtags is really the way to keep all these things linked in and feeding one another. We can also join protests and actions. So if you are based in London, there is the Oily Money Out action that is happening from the 14th to the 20th of October. So this is 16 days to go, as you can see here. So this isn't for everyone. Not everyone wants to take these sorts of actions, but if you are interested, even just getting some of the info pack or the resources to understand more about this, it's a really good place to be looking. Yes, I think that's what I've got on what can we do. And then I've got next non-exhaustive list of resources. So again, I will send all of this over to you so you can have a look and see for yourselves if there's anything that you're interested in. And just a couple of other things quickly, because I really would love to give you time if you are interested in asking any questions. Oh, yeah, I wanted to draw your attention to this. This is Bank.Green. Bank.Green, they're run by volunteers. It's essentially what they do is sort of like meta analysis of research from lots of international organisations who, yeah, they research all of this sort of green finance. And Bank.Green have tried to make everything very simplified. So you can literally just type in, you can have a look, you can see what your bank looks like. And I was really happy to see that icon, You Bank with CAF, which is the charitable, I want to say Charitable Action Fund. I think I've got it written down somewhere up here. The Charities Aid Foundation. So if we were to look at the Charities Aid Foundation and then click on Check My Bank, your bank is great. Your money is definitely not funding the fossil fueled industry. We can be sure of everything that your bank is doing is great. And then if you continue to scroll down, it sort of tells you other things you can still do, even though you're banking with one of the best options out there. So it gives you the option to sign up to the movement to learn more about these issues and discover other ways to divest from fossil fuels. But if, say, for example, you personally banked with someone like Barclays, you might be perhaps surprised to read, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised to read, your money is being used to fund the climate crisis at an alarming rate. So Barclays are, on a global scale, they are the 7th worst in the world, which I think is quite impressive for a small little UK bank, if impressive is the right word to use. So yeah, you can have a look at these things for yourself. You can see with Bank.Green what your bank is doing. You can see with Make My Money Matter what your pension provider is doing, and you're presented with really immediate and simple ways to send template letters and start taking action. So yeah, I think there's some really really easy ways for people to start dipping their toes in and making changes and starting to have conversations. And I will stop talking now because that's been an extraordinary length of time. And hopefully I can figure out how to stop screen sharing. Your
Thank
screen
you so
sharing
much.
stop. There we go. Thank you.
That's fascinating. And lots of really useful links.